I've decided not to go through the rest of chapter 5 because it helped me become more aware of who Purdue's audience was. I was initially under the impression that the audience was Buddhist practitioners wanting to learn debate, and I've begun to see that another big chunk of his audience is professors and students of Western philosophy. And so he was explaining some of those things in chapter 5, I think for the benefit of those people, showing in some ways how Buddhist philosophy corresponded or didn't with Western philosophy. But I don't think that is what concerns us. And I, for one, I forgot all my P's and Q's. It was a long time ago. So I'm not really equipped to explain that to you. And Venerable Pema looked up the 4, what was it that he mentioned last time? 4 something. And yeah, and together we tried to make sense of it, what he was saying, and this is the result. Okay, so we're going to go on to chapter 6, okay? And that chapter is about the Buddhist syllogism. Okay, so as before, I'll read and then I'll stop and comment from time to time. In Buddhist reasoning and debate, there are 2 main argument forms used to defeat wrong conceptions and to support a clear understanding. So that's our purpose, yeah? To eliminate wrong conceptions in ourselves, to help others eliminate their wrong conceptions, and for us and others to gain a clear understanding. So we have to remember that's the purpose. The purpose is not to win the debate. The purpose is not to be the best debater on the ground. Okay, the purpose is to increase your own and others' understanding of the Dharma for the purpose of transforming the mind. Because if our motivation is to be the best debater and to win the debate, then we have a worldly motivation, and an action that is supposed to be Dharma becomes 8 worldly Dharmas. Okay, so the first of the 2 main argument forms that we should become acquainted with is the syllogism, which consists of a thesis and a reason stated together in a single sentence. Okay, so I forgot what syllogism I wrote there.
Self is impermanent because it is a product of causes.
Okay. Oh. Does that help you see better? No? Okay, turn it off, because yeah. So, the standard argument is, and we'll come to that in the chapter, is sound is impermanent because it's a product of causes. So the reason they used that in ancient India was because the Brahmins who recited the Vedas said that the sound of the Vedas was permanent. Yeah, it was, I'm not sure if it was created by Brahman, but it was permanent. It never changed. And so this was, a contention that was completely opposite to the Buddhist way of looking at things. And so even though they give this syllogism, to us it seems like, well, what? Sound is impermanent because it's a product of causes. Well, duh. It may seem like that to us, but at that time, this was a big subject of debate, and defeating the Brahmins, and showing them the error of their view was a big thing, because then they couldn't hold on to some of their beliefs. But I switched it to the self is impermanent because I put a product of causes and conditions. Huh? Product of causes, okay. So I switched it because I think for us, or at least I know for myself, and hopefully for you too, maybe not, that thinking about myself as being impermanent because I'm a product of causes has much more of an impact on my life than refuting the Brahman's theory that sound is permanent, okay? Because when I really look, my just gut feeling is, yes, I change from day to day. I can't really deny that. But I'm not going to die. Yeah, I'm permanent. I'm not caused. I deserve to be here. I am here. I am always here. I am not simply a product of causes such that if the causes didn't exist, I wouldn't exist. Yeah. Do you think that way about yourself? I'm a product of causes, and if the causes weren't there, I wouldn't be there? No, that's not how we see ourselves at all. I'm here. Yeah, like uncaused, naturally, existent. So that's why I switched the usual syllogism a bit, the hopes that it might, shake our wrong conception mind a little bit more. Okay, so once you are familiar with the Buddhist syllogism, you can understand the other argument form, the consequence, which is an argument structurally similar to a syllogism, but it is merely a logical outflow of an opponent's own assertions. Okay, so the syllogism is actually proving something for someone who's interested in that topic. And the consequence is showing that person the fallacies of their own wrong beliefs. Yeah. In other words, if you believe this and this and this, then you must also believe this, knowing full and well that what you just said they must also believe, they're going to go, no, I don't believe that. And then in that turn, it will help them realize that their basic understanding, their basic assertions were wrong. The Tibetan argument forms were brought over with minor adaptations from the Indian logical forms. The syllogism and the consequence are two different tools, and they operate differently. For a syllogism, the person who formulates the argument, the one who speaks it or writes it, is bound to the argument and is responsible for the validity of the argument. In other words, if you're having a debate or discussion with somebody and you assert a syllogism, you need to defend it because it means this is what you believe. Okay. For a consequence, that's not true because the consequence, you're showing the other guy the fallacy of their beliefs. So you don't have to believe what you're stating because you already know it's incorrect. Yeah. Okay, so let's see. The word for thesis of a syllogism has the sense of a promise. So for a syllogism, the speaker is always trying to say correctly how things are. For a consequence, one requirement for the argument to be valid is that it flows as a logical implication of another's assertions. But the one who formulates the consequence is not bound to the validity of the argument, only to the fairness of the connection with the other person's words. Okay? So when you state a syllogism, you better be prepared to defend it. When you state a consequence, you don't have that obligation. there is no thesis or promise for a consequence. In its place is a point of clarification. In other words, dear Joe, please clarify. You said this and this, so then you must also believe this. Yeah, and then, so you're asking Joe to clarify it. And Joe goes, no, I don't, Okay, so a consequence would be, somebody who thinks that if something is let's say there's somebody who thinks that if something is a product, then it must be permanent. Okay? Could be people who think like that. So if somebody thinks like that, then you say, oh, then sound is, how do you frame it now? I didn't think about this before. Well, I'm used to using the one. If somebody believes in inherent existence and they believe in dependent arising and they think that because it's dependent arising it must be inherently existent, yeah? So then you say, oh, okay, so then, sound is not a dependent arising because it is inherently existent. Okay? Because the guy said he believes that dependent arising means means inherent existence. Yeah. But he also thinks that sound is a dependent arising. Yeah. So you say, okay, well, sound is not a dependent arising because it's inherently existent. Yeah, and then he goes, well, yeah, I believe it's inherently existent, but I also believe it's dependent arising. So something's wrong here. And then they come to realize, oh, what's wrong is I think that because it's a dependent arising, it must be inherently existent. Okay, but he's going to get into that in the next chapter, so don't worry about it here. Okay, so then the argument form. This chapter is about syllogism, so we'll stick with that. In the tradition of Buddhist epistemology, syllogisms are not valid arguments in the sense of being valid under all interpretations. Rather, here an argument is determined to be valid only in relation to certain persons at certain times. This is because the only value of an argument is its efficacy in bringing forth new knowledge. Yeah, that's the only value of the argument, is to bring forth new knowledge. This implies that the Buddhist logicians assert that an argument is not determined to be valid merely by its form, for validity is inextricably linked with the possibility of epistemological verification of that argument. Okay, so what they're meaning is that an argument being valid isn't because you were able to state the argument in a form that conforms to the rules of stating arguments. That's not what makes the argument valid. What makes it valid is if you've been able to state something for a person who is interested in learning, and that argument is able to bring forth new knowledge in that person. Okay? Do you understand that? Yeah? So it's not just a thing of making the perfectly formed argument that corresponds to all the rules. It's a thing of making an argument that will bring forth new understanding. Thus, a logical argument is determined to be valid only in a certain restricted sense. Okay? There are four major characteristics involved in determining the validity. So, first is the property of the subject, which means, and he'll He'll describe it later, but just briefly, it means that the reason applies to the subject. Okay? The forward privation, which means if it's the reason, then it must be the predicate. Yeah. And the counter privation, which means if it's not the predicate, it won't be the reason. And the epistemological requirements. Okay, we'll come back to this and go through it a little bit more. Yeah, this is just the introduction. The form of the syllogism generally used in Tibetan philosophical literature and in debate consists of a thesis and a reason, both what is to be proven and the proof in one sentence. Here, this argument form is called a syllogism, not in the sense of a series of sentences consisting of the premises and a conclusion, but in the sense of an argument form. So I guess in Western logic, you must have a series of sentences. Anybody informed on Western logic? But I think it must, kind of like if it's A, then it must, if it's A, it's B, if it's B, it's C, therefore A is C, something like that. It's a series of different sentences. But here, everything's put in one sentence. For example, a syllogism is stated in the style of the Buddhist. The subject, sound, is an impermanent phenomena because of being a product. Okay, so we use the subject, the self. They always put the subject, the self, And Geshe-la, when we were working on the book, he was insistent that I put it in that form, Consider the self, it is this. But it seems to me to be much more streamlined to just say the self is, impermanent because it's a product of causes. Yeah, I was trained to cut out unnecessary words, but anyway, this is the way they say it. Okay, so the thesis, or what is to be proven, is that sound is an impermanent phenomena. Okay, let's look at identify the parts in the syllogism, okay? So here, the self is the subject. That's what we're talking about, okay? Its being impermanent is what we're trying to prove. Yeah, it's called the predicate. And the reason that we're using to prove it is because it's a product of causes. So the thesis, we have a subject and a predicate. Those two together are called the thesis. So the thesis is sound is impermanent. The reason is because it's a product of causes, or the self is impermanent, okay? So those are you'll need those terms to understand the rest of what we're talking about, okay? So in this argument form, the thesis is framed. The subject sound is an impermanent phenomena. The reason or proof in this case, product, is framed because of being a product. Okay? This argument form is called an enthymeme, excuse my pronunciation, which is a sort of informal argument with a suppressed premise or conclusion. Such an argument is often contained in a single sentence, as in the Buddhist syllogism. The Buddhist syllogism is a first-order enthymeme in which, so this must be more Western stuff, in a single sentence, as is the Buddhist syllogism is a first-order enthymeme in which the major premise that all products are impermanent phenomena is suppressed, meaning that it is not stated explicitly. Yeah, so I remember something, there were major and minor premises in Western logic. Yeah, so the major premise here would be that all products are impermanent phenomena. Okay, but it's not stated explicitly, so it's called it's suppressed, and it's a first-order ethymeme. Mazel tov. This single-sentence form of the Buddhist syllogism used here is a condensation of a multi-sentence form used in the works of the Indian Buddhist logicians. Consequently, this terse argument form implies a series of premises and a conclusion which form a more recognizable syllogism, as will be shown. As you will see, the single-sentence form is particularly well adapted to flowing debate. And it's concise. It has everything in one sentence. Okay, so the elements of a syllogism. So the series of sentences implied by the single-sentence form of the Buddhist syllogism is predicated by cross-relating the three basic units of that syllogism. These three are the subject, here, the self, the predicate to be proven is impermanent, and the reason, because it's a product of causes. And that reason is more typically known as the sign. So sign and reason are equivalent terms. I prefer to say reason, because sign makes me think of a stop sign or something like that, you know. So in the sample syllogism, we'll do it our way. The subject, the self, is an impermanent phenomena because of being a product. So the subject is the self, the predicate to be proven, or the predicate of the probandum, more Western terms, is impermanent phenomena, and the sign, which is mutually inclusive with reason, is product. Here the term predicate is not used just in its grammatical sense, in the sense of a predicate of a sentence, as in sound is an impermanent phenomena. So don't think of predicate as, you know, when you diagram sentences as a grammatical thing, yeah. But here it's the thing that's to be proved, okay. But, but means, the predicate means a quality or an attribute in the way that being a material phenomena is a property, quality, or attribute of a tree or a paper. Okay, so we're trying to show that impermanence is a quality or attribute of the self. Anything, be it existent or non-existent, is suitable to be stated as a subject, a predicate to be proven, or a sign, or a reason, though they do not always work, of course. Okay, so you can say anything you want. That doesn't mean it's a valid reason, yeah? Just because you put something in it. It's very interesting this way because, you know, our idea of valid can be quite interesting, yeah? And when I was, the last day we were in Singapore, we had lunch at someone's home, and she invited all of her friends. And one of her friends, I had met her before, and she had grown up, she was a Buddhist, but she had gone to, I think it was a Catholic school or a Christian school when she was young. So she heard all this stuff about God. And so in the course of the Q&A session, I just mentioned, you know, well, we as Buddhists, you know, refute the idea of a creator God. And she just all of a sudden said, but the Christians say God exists. As if, because they said so, then God must exist. And I said, just because people believe God exists doesn't mean God exists. That's why one of the titles of one book is Don't Believe Everything You Think, because we believe a lot of things that are wrong. And I think she was really taken aback, because there were so many people who believe God exists that even though she was a Buddhist, how could I possibly say God didn't? Yeah? It's interesting. Do you remember that? Okay, so the subject is the basis with respect to which a person is seeking to learn something. According to the tradition, a proper subject of a syllogism, also known as the basis of debate or a basis of inference, must meet two requirements, one formal and one epistemological. I sure wish there were a shorter word. Yeah, English is complicated. Why can't there be a one-syllable word instead of epistemological? Okay. Don't you agree? Yeah? Yeah, it's like Russian. The words have so many syllogisms. I mean, so many... Sorry. I'm jet lagged. So many syllables. Yeah? You try and learn Russian, the words all have many, many syllables. So you learn the first syllable, and then you forget the second one, and you remember the third one. And, yeah. Okay, so the first requirement, the subject must be held as a basis of debate in a syllogism. For example, as the self is held as the subject in the proof of the self as an impermanent phenomena. Okay? In other words, a subject must occupy the first position in a syllogism. Say that first. Yeah? That makes it easier to understand. Yeah? I'm also giving my editorial comments. I'm another writer. I can't help it, Okay. So it's the first thing in the syllogism, it's the thing you're talking about, okay? Second, in the sample syllogism, there must be a person who has ascertained that the self is a product, okay? That the self has the quality given as the reason, or another way of saying it, that the reason applies to the subject, okay? So it becomes a valid syllogism. One of the conditions is there must be a person who has ascertained that the self is a product, and that person must now be engaged in wanting to know whether or not the self is an impermanent phenomena. Okay. Do you want me to use the self, or do you want me to go back to sound as written in here? So keep with the self? Okay. Okay. So that a person has understood that the self is a product, as argued in the syllogism, indicates that the person is already involved in the reasoning process. The requirement that the person is now seeking to determine whether or not the self is an impermanent phenomena indicates that the reasoning process is not yet complete, for the person is still seeking to learn something about the basis of inference, the self. Okay? So sometimes you have a syllogism in which, this requirement is not met. In other words, the person doesn't understand that the self is a product of causes. Okay. Now, when we think about it, we would agree, yes, the self is a product of causes. Yeah. In our hearts, do we really believe that? doubtful. Okay? So, whether this is really a good syllogism, whether we're an appropriate candidate to explore this, we have to check. On an intellectual level, yes, maybe. Yes, maybe, yeah, that makes perfectly sense. Yeah, maybe, yes. No, maybe no. I'm making fun of myself. Anyway, so, there we have to see, are we actually a person who ascertains that the property is, that being a product is a property of the self.
I think that's kind of what happens when we do the one about emptiness.
The ones.
We have that syllogism, something about things are empty because they're dependent arisings. But I don't really think we get really that things are dependent arisings.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we think we understand that, but no wonder we don't get too far because we don't really see that.
Yeah. I mean, if we really saw that things were dependent arising, I think our attitude about things would really change. So you can see that there's many levels of understanding a syllogism, and you can understand it on one level such that it doesn't impact you at all. Yeah, and that's the difference between that, because that's actually a correct assumption. It sounds like an inference, but actually it's a correct assumption. If it were an inference, it would really affect us, and we would know for sure, oh my goodness, the self is a product of causes. Whoa! Okay, so you can see that many different levels of understanding here. From this epistemological requirement, one can understand that the form of syllogism used in this system is not valid in the sense of being valid for all persons. There must be a person who, within having certain knowledge about the basis of debate, in this case the self, is now seeking to learn something further as guided by the syllogism that he or she did not formally know. Thus, although formally solid or reliable in its form, the sample syllogism is not asserted to be valid for all persons in all contexts. Yeah, and I, for one, am very glad that he said this quite explicitly, because sometimes you look and, it seems like you understand something in the syllogism, and you can't understand why other people don't understand anything from it. Or other people understand something from it, and you can't figure out what in the world they're understanding. And so that's because the syllogism has to be appropriate for the person. Okay, so for example, if somebody had no clue what a product of causes meant, saying the self is, is impermanent because of being a product of causes, doesn't mean anything to them. Yeah, and if they don't actually have some understanding that the self is a product of causes, then the rest of the argument is going to make any sense to them, because that first part, the property, the property of the subject, hasn't been fulfilled. Okay? So, in other words, one syllogism is not going to necessarily make sense to everybody who hears it or reads it. Yeah, a person has to have a certain amount of knowledge to understand the syllogism. Okay? And I think that's important. Otherwise, the whole thing doesn't make sense. Yeah. Thus, although formally solid, the The sample syllogism is not asserted to be valid for all persons in all contexts. For instance, it is not valid for a person who is unable to understand, such as a dog. A dog is a person, by the way. Okay? Why is the dog a person?
Because it's merely imputed in dependence upon the aggregates.
Yeah. It's merely imputed in dependence upon the body, the body and mind. Okay? So person doesn't have to be human being. Okay. For example, the dog who does not understand language, nor is it valid for a Buddha or anyone else who has already completed the understanding and has not forgotten it. Neither the unprepared person nor the one who has already realized this is seeking to know whether or not the self is an impermanent phenomena. Okay, so you have to be interested in this. You have to want to know something. In the sample syllogism, the self is the subject about which one is seeking to know something. What the qualified individual is seeking to know is whether or not the self is an impermanent phenomena. In this syllogism, impermanent phenomenon is the predicate to be proven with respect to the basis of inference, the sound. Okay? So remember, basis of inference just means the subject. Thus, the thesis or promise of the sample syllogism, that which is to be proven, is that sound is an impermanent phenomena. Anything may be stated as a predicate to be proven. For instance, someone might state a proof of sound as a permanent phenomena. Okay, so you can say anything you want. You can say sound is a permanent phenomena because it's a product of causes. Yeah, that doesn't make it a valid syllogism. It's perfect in its form. You have the subject and the predicate and the reason, but it doesn't make any sense, okay? Okay. In the proof of sound of the self as an impermanent phenomena, that which is to be negated is that the self is a permanent phenomena. Okay. So this is the opposite of the thesis, that sound is an impermanent phenomena. So more precisely, that which is negated is that sound is a non-impermanent phenomena. Okay, so here it's not, he put the parentheses around impermanent phenomena because that's one unit. It wasn't a non-impermanent phenomena. Okay. Although the collected topics or dura literature consistently reports that which is to be negated is that sound is a permanent phenomenon, there is a slight verbal fault with this because this is not the full negation of the predicate to be proven. Okay, so the predicate to be negated is non-impermanent phenomena, the opposite of the predicate to be proven. So not permanent phenomena. People understand this? No? Okay. So when you state a syllogism like this, yeah, that let's say the self is an impermanent phenomena, you're also negating implicitly something else. So on first glance, it seems like what it's negating is that sound is a permanent phenomena because permanent is the opposite of impermanent. Okay? But what he's saying is, yes, that's true, but that's actually not technically the whole thing that's getting negated, because what you're really negating is everything that is not an impermanent phenomena. So that's why it's non-impermanent phenomena. So if we ask, what is an example of a non-impermanent phenomena? You might say space, because that's a permanent phenomena. What's another example?
Emptiness.
Huh?
A rabbit's horn.
A rabbit's horn. Okay. Is a rabbit's horn a permanent phenomena? No, it's a non-existent. Is a rabbit's horn a non-impermanent phenomena? Yes. Okay. Because a non-impermanent phenomena is everything that is not an impermanent phenomena. So that includes not only permanent things, but also non-existence. Okay? Okay. So a permanent phenomena is something that exists and does not disintegrate moment by moment. So the predicate of being a permanent phenomena is found only among existence. However, non-impermanent phenomena may be ascribed to both permanent phenomena and to non-existence as well. For a non-existent, too, is a non-impermanent phenomena. Okay? In taking the predicate to be negated as non-impermanent phenomena, we are able to explicitly exclude the possibility that the quality of being an impermanent phenomena, the predicate to be proven, might be found among non-existents. Okay, so by doing it this way, you're not only showing that the quality of impermanent phenomena, that what you're trying to prove, does not exist among permanent phenomena, but it also doesn't exist among non-existents. Okay? In taking, in taking the predicate to be negated as non-impermanent phenomena, we are able to explicitly exclude the possibility that the quality of being an impermanent phenomena, the predicate to be proven, might be found among non-existents. Understand that the grammar here has it that non applies to the whole phrase impermanent phenomena, not just to impermanent. Because if it applied only to impermanent, a non-impermanent, would be permanent. Yeah. Well, no, a non-impermanent could include. It seems like it would be permanent, but it should just non-impermanent. Well, anyway. Yeah, non-impermanent should include non-existence as well. But anyway. So for the clarity, I write it as non-impermanent phenomena, with impermanent phenomena in parentheses. In either case, being a permanent phenomena or a non-impermanent phenomena is to be negated with respect to the basis of inference, sound. In explicitly proving that sound is an impermanent phenomena, the argument implicitly proves that it is not a permanent phenomena, and also that it's not a non-existent. Okay. In the sample syllogism, the sign or reason is product. Here, product of causes. The thesis, the self is an impermanent phenomena, is justified by the reason, product. Sign is mutually inclusive with reason and proof. So those three terms mean the same thing. In the proof of a sound as an impermanent phenomena by the sign product, by the reason product, it is a product alone that is put as the sign rather than because of being a product. Okay, so it's just he's narrowing in on what actually the reason is. Although you may state anything as the sign, as the reason in the proof of the self as an impermanent phenomena, only some reasons will justify the thesis. Moreover, certain epistemological requirements must be satisfied in order for a reason to be correct. Okay? Everybody okay so far?
The statement about the sign or that the sign is the reason. Is that a linguistic thing because of the translation into English? We need the terms because it is, but that in Tibetan it would just be product, or what is that about?
I think he's just narrowing in on, what exactly is the sign or what exactly is the reason,
the product. Okay.
Yeah. Because of being is the padding around it, that shows what it is.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
I mean, because of being isn't going to be a reason, is it? If you eliminated product and just said sound is impermanent because of being, that doesn't make any sense. That doesn't prove anything. What proves something is product. So product is the reason.
Seems to me is product is the reason. I need the verb, but I'm good. Okay.
Okay. So now, correct signs. As in every system of reasoning, there are valid and invalid arguments. In the Buddhist system of logic and epistemology, as practiced in Tibet, the definition of a correct sign is that which has the three modes. That which is the three modes. Okay, so you're defining a correct reason. Yeah, so the reason must have three modes. I prefer to translate it as three criteria, because three modes, does mode make any sense to you? What is a mode? Huh? What?
Criteria.
In the dictionary, what does mode say in the dictionary? Let me see if I can look it up. How do I do this? Just when I don't want to look up a word in Kindle, then it looks it up. And now when I want to, it doesn't.
Manner, way, fashion, means, method, system, style, approach, technique.
Okay. Not criteria. So it got translated this way, and everybody, like the calf that walked down the path in a curve. So everybody does it this way thereafter, and it doesn't make sense. Anyway, back to logic. Okay, so the three modes or three criteria that a correct reason must satisfy. These are that the reason must be, one, the property of the subject. Okay, so the reason applies to the subject, the forward pervasion, and the counter pervasion. An example of a correct sign is a product. In the syllogism, the subject, the self, is an impermanent phenomenon because of being a product. Understand that product itself is the three criteria, for it is the property of the subject, it is the forward pervasion, and the counter pervasion. Okay. I usually think of these three more as the the relationship between the reason and the other elements, but technically speaking, it's just the reason itself. Of course, there are 3 sentences implied by the single-sentence Buddhist argument: the 2 premises and the conclusion. Okay, so what are the 2 premises going to be? Probably, my guess, is the major premise, what he said, that that products are impermanent, and I would assume a minor premise.
Sound is impermanent.
No.
Sound is a product.
I think that was the second one I'm going to say. But he said what the major one was the pervasion before, when he talked about the major premise.
I think that's the conclusion. Oh.
Yeah, that products are impermanent. Okay, that's the major premise. And then I would assume the minor one would be that sound is a product, and the conclusion is that sound is impermanent. Okay? Okay, even so, always bear in mind that it is only the sign that is the 3 criteria. A correct sign is not something that has the 3 criteria, but it is the 3 criteria. The definition of the correct sign in the proof of sound as an impermanent phenomena by the reason product is that which is the 3 criteria in the proof of sound as an impermanent phenomena by the reason product. Okay, that's the definition. This is not the definition of a product. Yeah, because the definition of product is the momentary. No, that's the definition of impermanent. The definition of product is causes and conditions, yeah. Rather it is the definition of the correct sign in the proof of sound as an impermanent phenomena by the reason product. Just product alone is the correct sign in this particular proof, but product as such is not what is being defined. Okay, he's just making that clear, but I think it's kind of clear already, isn't it? Yeah. So as you will see, there are definitions of each of the 3 criteria in the proof of the self as an impermanent phenomena by the reason product. Okay, so now we're getting into the first criteria, which is the property of the subject. So the first of the 3 criteria of a correct sign is the property of the subject. Here the term property has the sense of a predicate, a quality, or an attribute, and the claim is that product or productness is a property of sound. Okay, that the property of the reason or the quality of the reason is present in the subject. Okay, so that the reason applies to the subject. Yeah, that quality of being a product is a quality of sound. Yeah, or in our sense, is a quality of the self. It sounds strange to the English ear, but the Sanskrit sort of presents the reason as a quality. For example, productness, the quality of being a product. In a proof such as this, the subject and the reason must be such that it is accurate to state them together in a statement of a quality, a sentence of the form, that subject is that reason. So remember in the preceding chapter he talked about statements of qualities and statements of pervasion? So this first criteria is a statement of quality. Okay, it's just talking about a quality of the subject. For instance, the self and product are like this, for it is accurate to say that the self is a product. Does that jar you? The self is a product? Product? Yeah, I was produced. Well, okay, Mom and Dad, you know. But on the other hand, you know, I'm here. I'm not a product. I'm here. Okay. So the self is a product in that it is produced from causes and conditions. The self does not arise just spontaneously and without cause. But that's how I feel. Is that how you feel, that you arise spontaneously without a cause? Yeah. I'm just here. What are you talking about, causes? I'm here. Huh? Okay. Thus, productness exists with sound, for it is a quality of sound. The definition of something's being the property of the subject in the proof of sound of the self as an impermanent phenomena is, get ready, that which is ascertained by a person for whom it has become the property of the subject in the proof of sound as an impermanent phenomena, as only existing in accordance with the mode of statement with sound. Yeah? So which one do you understand? Yeah? When I hear things like that, I think there's got to be an easier way of saying it. Yeah, there's got to be an easier way. I haven't necessarily discovered it yet. Yeah, but maybe with a little bit more patience I will. So product is the property of the subject in the proof of sound as an impermanent phenomena by the sign product. They always, you know, whenever they say things, they always include the whole long sentence. Everybody knows we're talking about this syllogism. We all know we're talking about this, but you've got to state the whole thing so that by the time you get to the end of it, you've forgotten what the subject of your sentence was. Yeah? I mean, okay. Product, this is the subject of this sentence, okay, is the property of the subject in the proof of sound as an impermanent phenomena by the reason product. What were we talking about? You know, how about you just saying product is the property of the subject? Yeah, we all know what we're talking about. Okay, excuse me, do you remember to? Because product is ascertained by a person for whom product has become the property of the subject in the proof of sound as an impermanent phenomena by the sign product. Okay, so in other words, because product is ascertained, now what's it ascertained as? As only existing in accordance with the mode of statement with sound.
Mode of statement has to do whether it's an is statement or an exist statement. So if you're talking about an is statement,
Yeah, that's what he's going to explain.
you have to just throw out like 3/4 of the sentence.
Yeah, and even mode of statement. Even though we've done that chapter, are we really familiar with the term mode of statement? Mode of statement. What kind of statement? instead of motive statement, say what kind of statement it is. Yeah, it's an is statement. It's a quality statement. It's not a privation statement. Okay, but only existing, the way the English sounds, it doesn't sound right, does it? To say it's only existing. Anyway, that's my editorial. Okay. The property of the subject is reckoned between the reason and its basis of relation, the sound. So that means the property of the subject is just talking about the relationship between the reason and the subject. Thus, although technically only the sign product is the property of the subject in the sample syllogism, the first mode of the correct statement in this syllogism is formulated, sound is a product. Okay, so even though product is the property, you formulate it as sound is a product. In other words, you formulate it as showing the relationship between the subject and the reason. That's all it means. Are you confused? Remember he said before the actual reason is product, that the product is the three criteria. So here he's saying, yes, product is the first criteria property, but the way we express that is by saying the self is a product. So you give a sentence. Okay, that's all that means. Okay, and this indicates that this is always the way to check for whether or not a reason has the property of the subject. Okay, so this is how you confirm the first criteria. Is that subject that sign, that or that reason? Okay, so is the self a product? Yeah, that's how you check it. Yeah, does that subject have the quality of that sound, of that sign? So does that subject, the self, have the quality of the reason being a product? Okay, that's all it means. Yeah, it's just using a lot of words to say that. Do you get what it's saying? Yeah. Okay. Okay, reflecting this formulation, the definition specifies the association between the sign, between the reason and the subject, saying that the property of the subject must be ascertained as only existing in accordance with the motive statement with sound. So now he's going to explain what motive statement means. The motive statement in the proof of sound as an impermanent phenomena by the sign product, okay, is an is statement, a copulative statement or a statement of being. Okay, so when we talked about statements of qualities, something is this quality, yeah, it's different than an exist statement, or yeah, well, it's different than an exist statement, but he was the motive statement. Yeah, because he's going to talk about two modes of statement, an is statement and a exist statement. Yeah. Okay, so the reason is framed because of being a product. Thus, the reason is saying something about the manner of being of sound. Sound is a product. This type of statement is to be distinguished from exist statements, reasons that justify the existence of something by the reason. For example, in the syllogism, the subject, on that mountain pass, there is a fire because there is smoke. Yikes. We don't want that syllogism to be true. at least not anywhere on this planet where it's not wanted. Okay, but anyway, okay, so that is the mode in that syllogism. The motive statement is one of existence. The reason is stated in a manner to prove the existence or presence of something, fire, by the existence of another, smoke. Okay, so in that second motive statement, you're saying a fire exists because smoke exists. In the first motive statement, you're saying that sound is impermanent because it's a product. Okay, so product is a quality of sound. Okay, so you're not, in that one, you're not proving the existence of sound. You're not proving the existence of anything. You're just saying that this quality, means that you're just saying that the reason indicates the predicate, okay, or proves the predicate. Okay, this is not the same as saying, as implied by the definition, that the sign must exist with the subject. For example, in the proof of the self as an impermanent phenomena by the sign product, product exists with sound in accordance with the motive statement, for sound has the quality of being a product. So motive statement just means the kind of statement it is. Why you have to say in accordance with the motive statement? The product exists with sound in accordance with the motive statement, for sound has the quality of being a product. What's a simpler way of saying that? Yeah?
Break it up into more sentences. I would break it up into more sentences.
In more sentences, like what?
Hey, this one we're talking about, I found this very confusing. But I would break it up in more sentences, so I could throw out 3/4 of each sentence. And so I would know, hey, in this one, this is the syllogism we're talking about. And guess what? This is the kind of statement it is. It's an is statement. And now I would just get down to what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Because they put it all in one, and it's like too much.
Yeah, because what we're actually trying to say is simply that the self is a product. That's all. Yeah? And that saying the self is the product is the first criteria, establishing the first criteria.
The other one, I guess you'd say that there's smoke on the mountain pass.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the property of the subject.
Yeah, the presence of smoke on the mountain pass would be the property of the subject. Yeah. Also, the definition specifies that in order for something to be the property of the subject in the proof of sound as an impermanent phenomena, it must be ascertained by a person for whom it has become the property of the subject in the proof of sound as an impermanent phenomena. In other words, somebody, when you give this phenomena, must understand that sound's a product. Okay? A reason is not correct. It does not meet even the first requirement of a correct reason unless it is ascertained by a certifying consciousness. So if that person doesn't understand it, if they don't understand that the self is a product, then they're not going to understand the rest of the syllogism. That's all it's saying. In this system, a syllogism cannot be valid merely by its form, merely by putting it together in the proper way. The The heart of this definition is that the property of the subject is ascertained as only existing with sound. That sounds so strange. The specification, because it sounds like, by saying that, the property only, that product is only a quality of sound and not of anything else. That's what the English sounds like, but that's not what it means. The specification that the reason must be ascertained with sound, with the self, serves to eliminate an indefinite understanding. Okay, so saying that there must be somebody who understands that the self is a product eliminates an indefinite understanding. So that person has a definite understanding. They know that the self is a product. Okay, so, because if they don't understand that and their understanding is uncertain, then the rest of the syllogism isn't going to prove anything for them. Product is not the property of the subject in the proof of sound as an impermanent phenomena. For a person who is wondering whether or not sound is a product. Okay? So, product is not the property of the subject. If the person is wondering, well, is product a sign of the self? Is it a quality of sound, or is it not? Okay. Neither is it for a person who firmly holds that sound is not a product, or that the self is not a product. Okay? So, in other words, you must understand the self is a product. If you're not sure if the self is a product, if you firmly believe that the self is not a product, then the first criteria hasn't been established. Okay? Again, this emphasizes that the validity of an argument is bound up with the epistemological verification of that sign. In other words, somebody must understand it. A sign is the property of the subject only in relation to individual persons. So it's only going to work for the people who understand it, not for the people who don't understand it. Yeah, sure.
The way I understand this is that it's not just understanding, it's realization. The person has realized, they've had an inferential or a direct cognition that the subject is the reason. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not just understanding, it's not just a correct assumption or doubt, or understanding. Understanding implies just kind of a general...
understanding is a vague word.
Yeah.
You're not sure if it means realization? Or...
It does. Ascertain means realization.
Yes. Yes, I used understanding as meaning realization. Yeah.
How do you know that? Because the books don't define ascertain in the Catherine Rowland.
Yeah, no, ascertain means you really get it.
But you're saying ascertain means it's inferential because the...
Inferential or direct. You have a valid cognition of that.
Yeah, it just means you have a valid cognizer of it.
Because they don't, in Daniel Perdue's book and in Catherine Rogers' book, they don't specify that there. Are you just supposed to know that ascertain means that?
Yeah, that's what you're supposed to know. Okay. The reason I said that about understanding sometimes means realization is because sometimes we talk about the three kinds of wisdom, and Thupten Jinpa says we should call it the three kinds of understanding. So it's very much, how you use words and how you define a word. Anyway, back to this. Okay, a sign is the property of the subject only in the relation to individual persons. The requirement that the sign must exist with the subject ensures that the sign is a property of the subject, as productness is a property of sound. in saying that the property of the subject is ascertained as only existing with the subject. The definition ensures that the sign, that the reason, must exist with the subject, though not exclusively with the subject. But the way the English is stated, it sounds like it's exclusively with the subject. So this is what it's trying to say. Okay. That is, the sign must actually be a property of the subject, as sound as the self has the property of being a product. Yet, in order to be the property of the subject, the reason need not exist exclusively with the subject, but may apply to other things as well. This is the case here, for it is not the case that product exists as a quality of only sounds, because product exists as well as a quality of other phenomena, such as chairs, tables, and so forth. Okay, so I think we will stop here. Yeah, because we still have a way to the next thing. Yeah.
I have 2 questions.
Mm-hmm.
Not related. The first one is about the syllogism itself. Just that particular one, for me personally, because I can have a direct perception of the impermanence of the self. It would work better if I had this, the self is a product because it is impermanent, right? Mm-hmm. But you never see it that way.
Yeah.
So how come?
Okay. So I've had the same question. They say, okay, that being a product is easier to realize than being impermanent. So that's why product is used as a reason to prove impermanent. However, okay, I wonder sometimes, the way I was educated, yeah, especially in science, was all these things are impermanent. And it was never given the reason because they were a product. They were an impermanent because that's their very nature. Because protons are moving all the time and electrons are zipping around all the time. And, you know, that's just their nature, that all of these things are impermanent. So I grew up just believing that, you know, material things are impermanent because that's their nature. And then, because they're a product, I had never thought so much of there being a product and of product as proving impermanence. So am I the only one thinking that way, or is there something in our education? Yeah. I have some more about this, but just in terms of to this one point.
I agree.
Yeah?
That we see. I agree with you on that, except for that we see things like making things. Like we take clay and we make things when we're kids, or we get our tinker toys and we build things, or we take our blocks and we build castles or whatever. And that we see we've produced something, whereas we don't see subtle impermanence.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Was that what you were going to say? Yeah. And so that's exactly the point why product is used as a reason for subtle impermanence. Yeah. But I find it interesting that for me, in terms of my education, you know, it's like that's the way I was just learned in school all the time and came to believe it. Yeah.
Second question. The second question I have is more what I think I learned in the Pramana Vartika class, but the importance of the example. that goes with the syllogism, but I haven't seen that anywhere in here
Yeah,
yet.
he hasn't
so
put it
I
in.
think, I mean, like this one, the self is impermanent because it is a product of causes like the last moment of a candle flame. I mean, that does bring to mind a whole different understanding right away. So just in the structure, like the formal structure of a syllogism, because it's not mentioned here, I don't know, what's its place of the example? How important is it? How?
Yeah, the example is supposed to be something that's easier to understand than the actual, subject. Sometimes, depending, I think, what culture you grow up with, sometimes the reason is easier to understand, and sometimes it's harder to understand. Yeah. Huh?
The example you mean?
Yeah, the example. And I think that depends on the culture you grew up in. Yeah? Because I remember I said to His Holiness one time, he had been talking about this, and that he had been talking about that it's easier to realize the emptiness of the self than the emptiness of the table. And I said, gee, for me, seeing that the table is a dependent arising, and therefore it doesn't have any existence from its own side, is easier than understanding that for myself. But it's strange because they give the example of the car, the chariot, which is supposed to be easier to understand. But in terms of realization, you're supposed to realize the emptiness of the self first before the emptiness of phenomena. Yeah, but I was thinking, and what I said to him is because we grow up with such a solid sense of self that is different than if you grow up in traditional Asian culture, the sense of self that you grow up with, which is a much more communal sense. You're part of a family, you're part of a clan, what you do influences everybody else, in your group. Whereas we grow up with this very strong sense of, I am an individual, unrelated to anything else, uniquely me. Yeah. And so I wonder if because we grow up with that kind of idea, what I feel is that, gee, in some way, it's easier for me to realize that this is a dependent arising than to realize I'm a dependent arising. Yeah? Anyway, that's just my thoughts on the subject. I'm not saying it's the truth, but, I wonder how much culture has to do with some of these things.
Every once in a while when we would get the examples, because they were so strongly from the Tibetan culture, whether it was a plantain tree or the man without legs who fell on the wild ass, it's like, I'm just like, whoa!
Fell backwards
on the wild donkey and went running for precious human life. It was like, whoa!
Yeah. 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 You haven't heard the story?
No, I remember. I'm surprised you remembered it.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, I remember the story about the guy, to illustrate that death is impermanent. No, that life. Sorry. Maybe we better stop on that death, the time of death is uncertain. Okay, and the story is that there was a man at home alone one night, and he had strung up his bag of flour on the ceiling, like we all do here. Haven't you strung up our flour in the ceiling of the kitchen? And I guess to protect it. But our mice are too smart. They'd get into it even if you hung it from the ceiling. Anyway, so he was in his room and he started thinking, oh, I have this bag of flour, I'm going to be rich. Now I could get married, then I'll have a child. What will I name my child? Will I name him Tashi? Will I name him Trinley? Will I name him, Dundrup? And he got so excited about having a child that he started dancing, and he picked up a stick, and while he was dancing in anticipation of having this child after he got married, because now he has the bag of flour, so he's rich, he hit the bag, the string broke, and it fell on him and killed him. Yeah? And that's the story. Yeah. So there's just certain cultural elements that you come in contact with here. Yeah. We could maybe update the story too, He's so excited that he threw his computer in the air and it landed on top of him or something. Yes.
Actually, he probably jumped in a car and went to tell his friends and had an accident and died.
Yeah, like that.
I actually read that story last night. Interestingly, in How to Practice the Dharma by Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and he was just illustrating what happens when you think about the 8 worldly concerns. Mm-hmm. And the name of the child was Dawa Dragpa. So it was the moon, I think.
Okay.
Something moon.
Yeah, moon is Dawa. Dragpa is famous or renowned.
Yeah, famous moon.
Yeah.
But also, I
see, I messed up the story. I didn't even get the name of the non-existent kid correctly. Sorry, go on.
Oh, that's okay. I was also thinking, what's a modern example? I was like, that movie star who was in all those racing movies, the Fast and the Furious, Paul Rudd, I think was his name. And he had a car crash in real life, and it was a huge tragedy. And so, that's an example of getting involved with things.
That kind of example would have more impact on us, wouldn't it? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I did want to comment that it's interesting that he makes such a big deal that the syllogisms have to be understood by a person. Mm-hmm. I think, and I'm wondering, is it because he's saying that all knowledge is dependent on a consciousness?
Yeah.
So it's not like there's facts existing out there independent of somebody
mind. No.
To realize it.
Yeah.
And it also sounds like maybe the syllogism is a closed system.
What do you mean?
It kind of, you have to understand all parts of it.
Yeah.
And therefore, like a dog can't understand it, so it's like closed off to certain parties.
No, it just means you have to understand the whole thing. The argument isn't going to make sense for everybody.
Right. So it's not like a truth within and of itself.
No, it's exactly.
It's a reflection.
Exactly. It's not a truth in and of itself that every idiot should read or hear and instantly know it's true. Yeah. It's true. It has to be true to a certain person who is capable of understanding it and does understand it. Or does ascertain it, however you want to say it.
Maybe it's recognizing the limits of knowledge.
No, it's just recognizing that things exist independent on the mind. They don't exist independent of the mind. Yeah. And we feel very strongly that things exist independent of the mind. They're out there, objective. Yeah, when in actual fact, they exist in independence on the mind, because the mind is what conceives and puts the words to it. Yeah, the mind is what realizes it. So it's quite different than our usual understanding. That's why emptiness is hard to realize. Okay. The end.